One thing I will say is there's so much to the mystery of the miracle of procreation that we don't fully understand. To think that you can tamper with it in such a massive and fundamental way by placing a uterus into a man's body and just have everything work out is totally insane. Something like morning sickness, for example. I remember learning this recently. One of the reasons women have morning sickness is because her body is able to pick up on signals from the unborn child that whatever it is she's eaten isn't what that child needs, vomits it back up, eat something else instead. It's better for the child. Just that level of intricacy. There's so many other things, like a woman's body, the unborn child's body sending stem cells to the mother's body if she receives an injury. There's a lot to this that we're discovering that we didn't know in the past. And there's plenty that we still don't know. So to think that you can take this extremely intricate system that we don't even fully understand, remove it from a woman, place it in a man's body, and then just see what happens is one of the most hubristic and I would say callous things a group of human beings can do. How many unborn children are going to die in order for this sick, fetishistic human experimentation to be allowed to happen?
Yeah, so children are already dying. Children are already dying. They're already being trafficked. They're already suffering developmental injury and sometimes physical injury because of the technological interventions that we have had. And so we tend to be awakened and alerted to how grotesque this is when we think about a man receiving a womb transplant or when we think about artificial wombs. But right now, so it is very, very important that right now we figure out what we believe and we start to draw a line in the sand.
Amen.
And it has to be around the rights and well-being of children. That is the only hedge of protection that is going to be sufficient to combat not just the current assaults on kids, but the future assaults on kids. Because right now, the line in the sand is consent. If the adults are happy, if the contract is signed, if everybody consents, then this is great. And that often happens in surrogate pregnancies, right? Yep. The surrogate is happy because she's, earning some money to pay her kids' school bills. The commissioning parents are happy because they got their custom ordered child, right? The lawyers are happy. The physicians are happy. The child does not consent, right? A child never consents to losing a relationship with their genetic parent or their birth mother. The child doesn't consent to losing their right to life by being discarded, donated to research, spending their life in a freezer. I mean, this is the majority fate of kids created in the laboratory. So one of the reasons why I hammer, because there are a lot of concerns about things like surrogacy. There's a lot of interest when you're talking about womb transplants and things like that. Yep. Oftentimes it's, they send out the vanguard with a very sympathetic story that all of us go, oh my gosh, a woman who couldn't have children on her own, but her sister's going to do this altruistically and transfer her womb. It comes in the form of things that look more morally acceptable. We have got to right now understand the rights of children, the well-being of children. We need to articulate our defense based on children's interests first, because what is happening, what is coming down the pipe is so much more egregious and dystopian, and we have to start consistently fighting the battle now.
That's absolutely right. So you mentioned that the way they start these things is by pulling out an example of an individual person who's struggling with something, and someone they know and love is willing to do something that we might, on a surface level, in a misinformed way, regardless, is purely selfless. And it gets people on board with the project. Of course, this is always done, and it always results in disaster. So with no-fault divorce, for example, one of the reasons that no-fault divorce was pushed for, and one of the reasons that Ronald Reagan was in favor of it and pushed for it and got that passed, is because in his first marriage, his wife didn't want to be with him anymore. And so she made a bunch of false accusations up about him. And this is something which happened at that time when you needed to prove that someone had done something wrong to leave a marriage. Many people who had done nothing wrong, but whose spouse just wanted to leave them, would create lies and smear their character while abandoning them to add massive insult to injury, or really to add further injury to injury. And the argument was, if we just allow no-fault divorce, we're going to give an outlet to these kinds of situations so they won't get as ugly as they're getting now. And we're not going to be incentivizing more people to get divorced, because this is the line of reasoning and argumentation and rhetoric that cultural revolutionaries always seize onto and promote. We're just giving an outlet to something that's already happening, or we're just producing this new technology or cultural movement to aid people who are suffering deeply and who really need that help. Of course, what ends up happening is what happened with no-fault divorce and what's happened in every other circumstance where the behavior ends up spreading. So don't think that the woman who's brought out as an example of someone who could use a uterus transplant is going to be representative of the populations who are going to be taking advantage of this technology.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's always, that's, I feel like, how the left pushes this massive social overhaul is they appeal to what is called edge cases, right? They find this teeny little exception and then they override the rule. And then you see this in pro-abortion arguments, right? They pull out rape and incest. And then they say the entire law needs to bend for what we perceive to be, the one morally permissible, right? Those sympathetic case that you just can't get around. I mean, they do this in all marriage and family cases. Oh, you think kids should have a mom and dad? They should stay with their abusive biological parents. Yep. And that's better than going to a loving gay couple that's going to cherish and protect them. I mean, so that is what they do, is they pull out these sympathetic cases and then which exists in a minority of cases, right? Like, we can acknowledge rape and incest. We can acknowledge a woman who was born without a uterus. We can acknowledge that there are occasions of biological parents who are abusive. And then they use that to wedge in and override the whole norm.